Hello again. Now, let's bring you a developing story this afternoon, and that's the debate over the employment of foreign nationals in the country. And that keeps raging. The Labour Minister earlier today, that's Mr. Thulas Nxesi, giving an update on policies about this matter. These include the draft National Labour Migration Policy and proposed amendments to the Employment Services Act. Labour consultant Tony Healy joining us now for more and for some of his analysis. Tony, good afternoon, and thank you very much for your time here on eNCA's Today. Some people will say it's about time because this issue of employment of foreign nationals in South Africa, particularly in the unskilled labour areas, has been going on for quite some time, affecting sectors, for example, like trucking.
Dan, good afternoon. Yes, indeed. And this issue has been on the table since 2016, when government first tabled discussions on this, and then in 2019 announced that this policy would be available for public comment by March 2020, but of course it's been delayed by COVID. So yes, indeed, we're now faced with the question of quotas when it comes to the employment of foreign nationals.
I mean, we live in a global village. I mean, when addressing this now, the minister talking about there's a draft National Labour Migration Policy. Looking at anywhere else in the world, we know that economic migrants are going nowhere. It's been part of human history for as long as you read and go back. But also there's our own Employment Services Act, the amendments. In your view, what should be the things that are captured here in a way that won't be viewed as xenophobic?
Well, what we're going to see is quotas in particular industries and focus on ensuring that where a South African citizen can be employed and has the skill to do a particular job, they will have first right to that job versus a foreign national. And you raise a very important point. A fine line has to be drawn between the tensions related to recognizing the rights of migrant workers on the one hand and ensuring job creation for local unemployed people on the other, bearing in mind, as we all know, South Africa has the highest unemployment rate in the world.
Yes, and the quota system would have also to bear in mind, I guess, the skill sets that are required, because whether we like it or not, our country lacks in a number of very critical skills for the economy.
Quite right, Dan. And many would say we have a skill problem in as much as we have an unemployment problem. And that is exactly right. We need to be attracting the right skills, and we need to be educating and training in the areas where the specific skills are needed, and that is in the area of digitization, engineering, and science, and all the technical sectors as well.
Yes, but and then you've got, I don't know how, from a labour perspective, Tony, if you have any thought around about small business, for example, which we are told are the best place for the creation of much needed jobs. I mean, from a labour perspective, should we be bearing in mind the place where small business fits into the bigger picture?
Yes, small business plays a crucial part in employment. And that's really where, in terms of job creation, that opportunity lies. And it's interesting to see in this policy document that particular reference is made to small businesses, small, medium, micro enterprises, and that a focus is going to be placed especially on those businesses, to the extent that the employment of foreign nationals may well be prohibited when it comes to certain defined small, medium, and micro-sized organizations.
Yeah, especially when I mean, we know the competition for limited resources on the ground. If you look at the small business sectors, government, I haven't seen this whole draft thing that's coming up. I haven't had sight of it yet, Tony. But one would imagine that, for example, it would really need a lot of convincing of an average South African in a township and outlying area that you've granted a business visa, so to speak, for somebody to work and set up a small business in an area where South Africans could do the same and do even very well in it and employ locals.
Quite right, quite right. And that's why we're seeing in this policy document the reference to the Immigration Act as an example itself having to be amended to make sure that there is greater screening of foreign nationals applying for local visas and to be documented. So there does appear to be a multi-pronged approach. There was an interministerial committee, the so-called IMC, that is behind this policy document. And they have gone to quite some considerable lengths to ensure that they've thrown the net very widely to ensure, for example, when it comes to visas, that the Immigration Act is going to be amended to make sure that, as I say, that screening of foreign nationals takes place more thoroughly.
Yeah, and I guess the conditions and terms, Tony, sorry, I'm keeping you longer than maybe you might have expected, but I guess this is important for us because the story has just broken through and we've seen the kind of potential violence that can happen because there's competition for resources at the local level, and we've got the likes of Operation Dudula currently where employers have been targeted to say you are employing foreigners. I think it's very important to talk about it, but I mean, when you employ foreign workers, I guess this new legislation, the Employment Services Act, would have to specify that you have to employ a foreign worker justifiably if the skill is required, but in the same terms as a South African. So they can't have better benefits. For example, I'm using that word broadly. Would that be an appropriate approach?
Quite right, quite right. And another important feature of the legislation you just quoted is that in the event a South African employer must employ a foreign national due to a skill shortage, that employer must simultaneously ensure that when they employ the foreign national, there is a skill transfer to local employees so they can be upskilled to do that very job that the foreign national has been employed to do. And that is also a strong feature in the policy that was announced by the Minister this afternoon.
Yeah, so I guess Home Affairs in its own part will have to make sure that by the time the employer is considering employing that foreign national due to skills shortage, they are in the country legally, properly documented. They've got the right paperwork like the visa, work visas or work permits. And also that point we are making there, they are also able and willing then to transfer the skill to a South African.
That's right. And again, we talk about the Immigration Act, and Department of Home Affairs plays a very big role in this policy statement document as well, because they need to manage the porous borders that we have. They need to manage the documentation in and out of the country. I think it was announced at lunchtime when the policy press conference was conducted. You know, some interesting statistics which I think are also relevant. 4% of our population is considered to be foreign nationals, and up to 7% of the workforce are considered to be documented foreign nationals. And there are probably a whole lot more undocumented foreign nationals in our workforce and indeed in the country.
Yeah, so I guess companies, when this kicks in, they're going to have to make sure that they've got their ducks in a row in terms of complying with this. One would imagine, Tony, that there will be some sort of regulation at a later stage that will enable the implementation of this comprehensive national labour migration policy, which is a first for democratic South Africa or in the history of South Africa.
Yes, quite right, Dan. It's the first time we see quotas. You know, there's been a lot of talk over the last 20 years regarding quotas when it comes to employment equity and affirmative action. And government's not gone that route, but they've gone directly to the question of quotas now, interestingly, when it comes to the employment of foreign nationals.
Yeah, finally, Tony, when you look at this, you follow the press conference. I mean, this is said to be a comprehensive framework, and it's going to bring for the first time the quota system. It's taken such a long time. It's taken the like, some people will say, of Operation Dudula, where employers were specifically targeted and foreign employees. It's taken some horrific acts of xenophobia where foreigners were targeted in the past and being driven out of spaza shops in town. townships. If you look at it now, the timing of it, I just want your view, and how would you describe it? I mean, this is surely a matter that should be overall welcomed. What is your view in summary as we conclude, Tony?
Well, Dan, as I said earlier, this legislation was spawned and first mentioned by government 6 or 7 years ago. So it's not so much that the question of recent developments with regards to the truckers, for example, that's not spawned this legislation. It's been in the pipeline for quite some time. But certainly historical local social unrest regarding xenophobia in recent years has probably accelerated the need for this type of legislation to be introduced.
Yeah, and the country needs it if you look at what is happening elsewhere in the world. Thank you very much, Tony Healy. He's a Labour expert, of course, Labour consultant here on Today on eNCA. Now, let's move to another developing story this hour. This is about South Africans who are trapped in Ukraine. They're desperate to leave, and now help may be